I am Victor Gallagher, 70 years old. If you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you I had lived a good life. I built a structural engineering firm from the ground up, amassed an $8 million net worth, and raised what I thought was a perfect daughter. But last Tuesday, standing in the shadows of my own home, I learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. I had left for a routine checkup in Bellevue, Washington, but forgot my phone. I turned back. When I entered the house through the silent garage keypad, I heard my daughter Valerie and her husband Derek whispering in my study. Valerie's voice was ice cold. I can't wait any longer. The old man is starting to ask about the bank statements. Tonight, we end this. Derek's response made my blood run cold. The final dose will wipe his short-term memory completely. By tomorrow morning, he won't even remember his own name. I froze, realizing I was the old man they were talking about. My own flesh and blood was planning to chemically erase my mind. If you are watching this, let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against those who underestimated you. Now let me tell you exactly how I dismantled their lives. Before I could back away, my elbow clipped a framed photograph of my late wife, Martha. It hit the hardwood floor with a deafening crash. The glass shattered. Inside the study, the whispering stopped instantly. Heavy footsteps rushed toward the door. I had 3 seconds to decide who I was going to be. The confused, helpless old man they thought I was, or the man who had spent 40 years negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts. I chose the latter. The study door swung open. Derek stood there, his face pale, his eyes darting frantically. Valerie was right behind him, but she recovered much faster. The panic vanished instantly, replaced by the mask of the perfect, caring daughter she had worn her entire life. "Oh, Dad," she gasped, rushing forward to grab my arm. "We thought you were at the clinic." "Are you okay? You didn't cut yourself, did you?" I looked from the shattered glass to her perfectly manicured face. "I heard you talking," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Something about ending it tonight." Derek swallowed hard. He looked like a cornered rat. But Valerie didn't miss a beat. She let out a small, exhausted sigh and smiled warmly. "It's Derek's business, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with fake exasperation. "He's been dealing with this toxic leeching partner at the brokerage firm for months. We finally decided to just cut ties. Tonight we end it. We're sending the termination email and washing our hands of the whole mess." She looked at me with such genuine, convincing empathy that for a split second I almost believed her. Almost. But I had spent a lifetime in construction, learning how to spot structural flaws, and the structure of her lie, though elegant, was built on a foundation of pure terror. I knew what I had heard. They weren't talking about a business partner. They were talking about doses, about my memory, about me. "Well, that sounds like a smart move," I replied carefully, stepping over the broken glass. "Never let anyone drag you down. I just came back because I forgot my phone." "It's right there on the credenza," Derek said quickly, too eager to be helpful. He practically ran to grab it for me, his hands shaking slightly as he handed it over. Valerie guided me toward the kitchen. "Since you're here, sit for a minute. You look a little flushed. Let me pour you your morning coffee. You shouldn't be rushing around at your age anyway." She moved around the kitchen of the home I had paid for the lakefront mansion they had begged to stay in temporarily 6 months ago during their so-called renovations. I watched her pour the dark liquid into my travel thermos. She moved with practiced ease, her movements smooth and calculated. She handed it to me, kissing my cheek. "Here, Dad. Drink up. We worry about your health." I took the thermos. The warmth of it seeped into my palm. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "I better get going, though. Traffic on the 405 is going to be terrible." I walked out to my car, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me. As soon as I sat in the driver's seat, the facade crumbled. My hands began to shake violently. I stared at the silver thermos in the cup holder. "We worry about your health," she had said. The words echoed in my mind, twisted and grotesque. For months I had been feeling off, clumsy, forgetful. I had chalked it up to grief to getting older. I had lost Martha 3 years ago, and the silence in the house had been deafening until Valerie and Derek moved in. I thought their presence was a blessing. I thought they were keeping me company. Now looking at that thermos, I realized my declining health wasn't a tragic act of nature. It was an orchestrated demolition. I didn't drive to the clinic. I drove straight past it, heading deep into downtown Seattle. I pulled into the parking lot of a private high-end toxicology lab I had used years ago when testing soil samples for a complicated building site. I walked in, slammed the thermos on the counter, and paid $2,000 in cash for an expedited comprehensive chemical analysis. I told them I needed to know exactly what was in that coffee down to the last microscopic molecule. I sat in my car for a long time after that, staring out at the gray Seattle sky. How did it come to this? I had given Valerie everything. Private schools, a debt-free college education, the seed money for her PR firm. When she married Derek, a commercial real estate broker who always seemed to be chasing the next big deal, I bought them their first house. And when they needed a place to stay 6 months ago, I opened my doors without hesitation. I had loved her unconditionally. But love, I was quickly learning, is a dangerous blindfold. My phone buzzed the next morning. It was the lead technician from the lab. "Mr. Gallagher," he said, his voice stripped of any professional detachment. "I strongly advise you not to consume anything in your house. What we found in this sample is highly dangerous." The heavy mahogany door to the study swung open violently. Derek stood frozen in the doorframe, looking like a ghost. Every ounce of color had drained from his terrified face. His jaw hung open, his rapid pulse beating visibly fast. A thin sheen of nervous sweat coated his pale forehead. He was terrified, his eyes darting around for an escape. But Valerie, my daughter, was an entirely different story altogether. She stepped out gracefully, pushing past his paralyzed, trembling frame. In a fraction of a second, her cold expression melted. It was instantly replaced by a flawless mask of warmth. It was a terrifying transformation to witness in real time. Had I not just heard her venom, I would believe. I stood there silently, looking down at the shattered glass. I knew I had to maintain my confused, clueless facade. "I heard you talking," I said, keeping my voice level. "I distinctly heard something about ending it tonight," I added. Derek flinched violently, his hands twitching erratically at his sides. He swallowed hard, completely, unable to formulate a single syllable. But Valerie did not miss a single beat in performance. She let out a soft, exasperated sigh of patient exhaustion. She glided forward, her movements perfectly smooth and entirely unhurried. Kneeling gracefully, she picked up glass with her manicured fingers. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with affectionate exhaustion. "You must have misheard us talking about Derek's struggling business. He has been dealing with an incredibly toxic leeching partner. It has been draining him completely, affecting our marriage deeply. We finally made the difficult decision to just cut ties. Tonight, we end it by sending the official termination email." She looked up, her large eyes wide with convincing empathy. "You just forgot your phone, didn't you, Dad?" she smiled. For a fraction of a second, my heart wanted belief. This was my little girl kneeling before me right now. The innocent child I patiently taught to ride a bicycle. The bright young woman whose expensive college tuition I paid. But I had spent 4 grueling decades in structural engineering. I learned how to spot microscopic stress fractures before collapse. And the underlying structure of her lie was pure terror. I knew exactly what I had heard through the crack. They were certainly not talking about a difficult business partner. They were quietly talking about administering final lethal chemical doses. They were talking about wiping my memory completely clean tonight. They were talking about me plotting my ultimate cognitive destruction. Well, that definitely sounds like a very smart move, Derek. I carefully stepped over the remaining shards of broken glass. I retrieved my forgotten phone from the small oak credenza. You should never let anyone take advantage of your work. I just came back inside because I left this here. My memory is slipping lately, I added with a smile. Derek let out a long breath he had been holding. His tense shoulders dropped 2 inches in sheer, undeniable relief. He practically leaped forward to pick up the wooden frame. I will get this mess cleaned up right away, Victor. He stammered, entirely too eager to be helpful and compliant. Do not worry about it at all, I have it. Valerie stood up casually, dusting off her expensive designer slacks. She approached me and gently guided me toward the kitchen. Since you are here, you should sit down a minute. You look a little bit flushed today, Dad. Sit down. Let me pour you your morning coffee before you leave. You really should not be rushing around so much anyway. She moved effortlessly around the massive custom kitchen I bought. This was the luxurious lakefront mansion they begged to inhabit. They claimed they needed a temporary home during delayed renovations. I quietly watched her pull down my silver travel thermos. She carefully poured the dark, steaming liquid from the carafe. She moved with a practiced, terrifying, and profoundly unsettling ease. There was absolutely no hesitation in her hands right now. No nervous trembling, no lingering guilt, no signs of remorse. There were only the smooth, calculated motions of routine chores. She secured the insulated lid tightly, walking back toward me. She handed the heavy metallic container directly into my hands. Then she leaned in closely, wrapping her arm around me. She pressed a soft, lingering kiss against my wrinkled cheek. Here you go, Dad. Drink up on your way out. We worry about your health so much. We want wellness. I took the thermos from her outstretched, perfectly manicured hands. The brushed metal felt uncomfortably warm against my right palm. It provided a sharp contrast to the icy, terrifying chill. That chill was radiating relentlessly through my entire aching chest. Thank you, sweetheart, I said deliberately, forcing a gentle smile. I better get going, though, before I miss my appointment. Traffic on the interstate is going to be absolutely terrible. I turned away from her and walked out the door. I listened closely as the heavy security door clicked shut. It closed with a solid, echoing thud behind my back. I climbed into the leather driver's seat of my car. I firmly closed the door, sealing myself inside the cabin. The very moment I was entirely alone, my facade crumbled. My hands began to shake violently against the steering wheel. I placed the silver thermos inside the center cup holder. I simply stared at it for a long, quiet time. We worry about your health so much, she had whispered. The words echoed repeatedly in my mind, sounding completely twisted. They felt distorted, deeply disturbing, and profoundly unforgivably grotesque now. My structural engineer's intuition was a primal survival instinct now. It was honed over a long lifetime of evaluating dangers. Evaluating hidden risks and dangerously unstable foundations, my intuition screamed. I did not attempt to unscrew the black plastic lid. I did not lift the metal container to my lips. I did not dare to take a single tentative sip. Instead, I sat perfectly still in the dim, shadowed light. The garage was quiet, isolating me with my dark thoughts. I looked intensely at the innocent-looking container before me. I wondered exactly what kind of lethal mind-erasing poison, what toxic cocktail my own beloved daughter had just handed to the father who had given her absolutely everything. I realized in that moment that my life was over. At least the life I thought I knew was gone. The peaceful retirement I had meticulously planned was a lie. I was no longer a retired engineer enjoying his twilight. I was a target marked for cognitive demolition and ruin. I started the engine, the low hum filling the garage. But I did not put the car into reverse gear. I needed a plan before I made my next move. A plan to expose them and protect my remaining family. A plan to ensure they never touched my grandson, Leo. I slowly pulled out of the driveway, gripping the wheel. I left behind the house where my enemies now lived. I headed toward the city carrying the evidence with me. Tonight, someone's life was going to end. But not mine. I merged onto the interstate, leaving the quiet wealth of my neighborhood behind. The morning traffic was heavy, a river of red brake lights stretching toward the Seattle skyline. I was supposed to be heading to my cardiologist in Bellevue for a routine checkup. Instead, I bypassed that exit entirely. I gripped the steering wheel with hands that still wanted to tremble, forcing my breathing to steady. I navigated through the labyrinth of the city, heading toward the industrial district. There was a private analytical laboratory down by the shipyards. I had used them decades ago when my construction firm needed independent, unquestionable soil testing for a highly contested commercial build. They were discreet, fiercely independent, and they asked absolutely no questions as long as the invoice was paid in full. I parked my car in this damp lot and walked into the sterile, brightly lit reception area. The smell of bleach and ozone hit my nose. A young woman behind thick security glass looked up from her computer monitor. I placed the silver thermos squarely on the metal counter. "I need a comprehensive toxicology screen on the liquid inside this container," I told her, my voice unwavering. "I want a full breakdown of every chemical compound, heavy metal, and synthetic drug present. And I need it rushed. 24 hours maximum." She blinked clearly, taken aback by my intensity. "Sir, a rushed comprehensive panel like that requires priority instrument time. It will be extremely expensive." I pulled my money clip from my jacket pocket and counted out 20 crisp $100 bills. I slid the $2,000 under the glass partition. "Will this cover the priority fee?" I asked. She nodded quickly, sweeping the cash into a drawer and handing me a stack of intake forms. I filled them out with meticulous precision, providing a secure burner email I used for private business deals and my personal cell phone number. When I returned to my car, I did not drive away immediately. I drove to a quiet overlook facing the gray, churning waters of Puget Sound. The sky had darkened, and a cold, steady rain began to drum against my windshield. I sat in the driver's seat, watching the ferries carve paths through the fog. I had a lot of time to think. How did I get here? How does a man build an empire from the dirt, up only to find the rot growing inside his own living room? I started with absolutely nothing. 40 years ago, I was just a hungry kid with a hard hat, calloused hands, and a desperate desire to build something that would last. I poured concrete. I tied rebar. I worked 80-hour weeks until my joints screamed and my muscles burned. Eventually, I bought my first small crew, then my own firm. Over the decades, I built that firm into a structural engineering powerhouse. I amassed a net worth of $8 million. I earned every single penny of it through sweat, sleepless nights, and an uncompromising dedication to structural integrity. I never took shortcuts in my buildings, and I never took shortcuts with my family. Martha was my rock through all of it. She was a woman of quiet strength and profound grace. We shared a beautiful life together until cancer took her 3 years ago. Her passing hollowed me out. It left a void in my chest that no amount of money or success could ever fill. When Martha died, the sprawling lakefront mansion became a silent, echoing tomb. I felt adrift. Then there was Valerie. She was my absolute pride and joy. From the moment she was born, I gave her the world. I wanted her to have the security I never had growing up. I paid for elite private schools. I covered her expensive university tuition without batting an eye. When she wanted to start her own public relations firm, I provided the 6-figure seed money. When she married Derek, I gave them the down payment for their first luxury home. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was providing a foundation for her success. But sitting in the cold car watching the rain blur the Seattle skyline, a bitter realization washed over me. I had not built a foundation for her. I had built a pedestal of entitlement. I remembered her as a little girl running to greet me when I came home covered in construction dust. She would throw her arms around my neck, smelling of strawberries and innocence. The woman I saw this morning, the one who coldly poured me a cup of poison while kissing my cheek, was a complete stranger. She was a predator wearing my daughter's face. They had moved into my home 6 months ago, claiming their own house was undergoing massive, unlivable renovations. I welcomed them eagerly. I thought they were moving in to keep me company, to help me cope with the lingering grief of losing Martha. Instead, they had moved in to dismantle me. I spent the rest of the day wandering the city, killing time. I ate lunch at a small diner, paying in cash. I could not bring myself to return to the mansion until late evening. When I finally walked through the front door, the house felt entirely different. It was no longer my home. It was hostile territory. Valerie and Derek were in the kitchen. They greeted me with wide, artificial smiles. "How was the doctor?" Dad Valerie asked, her voice light and musical. I lied smoothly. I told them the doctor said I was just experiencing normal age-related fatigue. I claimed he recommended more rest and prescribed a few harmless vitamins. Derek visibly relaxed, his shoulders dropping. Valerie smiled and offered to make me dinner. I declined, feigning a lack of appetite, and retreated to my bedroom. That night was the longest night of my entire life. I locked my bedroom door. I wedged a heavy wooden chair under the brass doorknob. I did not eat anything from the kitchen. I drank water only from the bathroom faucet. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling shadows. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window panes sounded like footsteps approaching my door. I was a prisoner in my own fortress. I realized the true horror of my situation. My declining health over the past few weeks, the trembling hands, the sudden bouts of confusion. The terrifying memory lapses was not nature taking its course. It was them. They had been feeding me madness drop by drop, watching me slowly lose my grip on reality. Morning finally broke across the sky. I took a quick shower and slipped out before they awoke. I drove to a park, waiting in suffocating silence. At exactly 9, my phone buzzed. It was the forensic technician. His voice was completely stripped of any professional pleasantries. His tone was incredibly dark and grave. Speaking, I replied, gripping the wheel. "Mr. Gallagher, I strongly advise you not to consume anything in your house. What we found in this specific liquid sample is extremely toxic and highly dangerous." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, the cold plastic slick with my sudden sweat. "Highly dangerous," I repeated, my voice dropping to a harsh, disbelieving whisper. "Explain to me exactly what you mean by highly dangerous, young man." The technician let out a heavy breath, the distinct sound of rustling paper crackling through the small speaker of my mobile device. "Mr. Gallagher, the dark liquid in that thermos contained a highly sophisticated, deliberately measured chemical cocktail. We found severe, highly concentrated traces of a substance called scopolamine. It was seamlessly combined with a heavy, largely undetectable liquid sedative. Do you understand what that actually means?" I closed my eyes, feeling a sudden violent wave of nausea wash over my entire body. Scopolamine. I knew the name from my time managing overseas construction projects in South America decades ago. It was a terrifying drug often used by ruthless criminals to completely strip a victim of their free will, their memory, and their basic cognitive functions. It literally turns a functional human being into a docile, highly confused, and easily manipulated puppet. When mixed with the specific liquid sedative we successfully isolated, the technician continued, his voice tight, with genuine professional concern. "It creates a very specific, very terrifying clinical profile. It is methodically designed to perfectly mimic the exact progressive symptoms of acute dementia and early-onset Alzheimer's disease. Sir, whoever carefully prepared this morning beverage was not trying to simply harm you physically. They were actively, scientifically trying to completely erase your mind. They were systematically dismantling your cognitive awareness drop by agonizing drop." The phone slipped slightly in my trembling, sweaty grip. I thanked the technician for his urgent diligence, my voice sounding incredibly hollow and distant, almost like it belonged to a complete stranger standing far away. I ended the call and tossed the device onto the leather passenger seat beside me. The silence inside the car was absolute, suffocating, and incredibly heavy on my chest. I sat perfectly still for a very long time, staring blankly at the wet, rain-streaked windshield as the Seattle weather mirrored my internal storm. The scattered puzzle pieces of the past few months, the strange, seemingly disjointed fragments of my suddenly declining health, snapped into place with horrifying, crystal-clear precision. Everything made terrifying absolute sense right now. I vividly remembered the sudden, inexplicable trembling in my hands during a quiet family breakfast just 2 short weeks ago. I had dropped a simple glass of tap water, watching helplessly as it shattered on the expensive kitchen tiles I had paid to install. Valerie had immediately rushed over with her performative, suffocated gasps of highly exaggerated concern. "Oh, Dad, you really need to sit down and rest," she had said, gently guiding me to a wooden chair with a look of profound pity. I remembered the absolutely terrifying afternoon. I could not remember where I had placed the keys to my own car, a vehicle I had reliably driven for 4 entire years. I had wandered the massive house for a full hour, feeling entirely lost, completely disoriented, and deeply frightened in the very hallways I had built for my family. I had sadly chalked it all up to the inevitable, cruel, and unavoidable march of old age. I genuinely thought the deep, lingering grief of losing my beloved Martha was finally taking a heavy physical toll on my aging, tired brain. I truly thought my mind was naturally, organically failing me, but it was definitely not nature taking its course. It was absolutely not grief clouding my thoughts. It was a deliberate, methodical, and incredibly cruel, calculated poisoning. Every single cup of hot coffee Valerie handed me with a warm, loving smile. Every soothing glass of herbal tea she graciously prepared for my evening relaxation. Every single home-cooked meal she so kindly offered to prepare for her aging, supposedly vulnerable father. They were all heavily laced with this insidious, mind-erasing chemical cocktail. My own flesh and blood, the only daughter I had fiercely protected, generously financed, and loved beyond any rational measure, was slowly dripping pure madness directly into my veins. She was gleefully watching me deteriorate, watching me struggle desperately to hold on to my slipping sanity. And she was highly likely taking meticulous, detailed notes on my tragic cognitive decline. The sheer, calculated sociopathic evil of her daily actions was almost too massive for my brain to fully comprehend in one sitting. A profound, intensely burning rage ignited deep within the center of my chest. It was not a hot explosive or reckless anger. It was a completely cold, absolute, and terrifyingly calm, focused fury. It was the exact kind of pure, unadulterated rage that relentlessly builds entire corporate empires and ruthlessly destroys them with equal devastating prejudice. I slowly looked up at my own reflection in the rectangular rearview mirror. The man looking back at me was definitely not the confused, failing, pathetic senior citizen Valerie and Derek firmly thought they had successfully created. The man staring back in the mirror was a veteran structural engineer who knew exactly how to calculate massive load-bearing weights, a man who knew exactly how to identify catastrophic hidden stress points in a foundation, a man who knew exactly how to properly and safely demolish a fundamentally rotten, unstable building right down to the ground. I was currently living with 2 ruthless, exceptionally cold-blooded, and highly patient predators. They were comfortably sleeping under my expensive roof, eating daily at my large dining table, and smiling brightly to my weary face while they actively plotted my total psychological destruction. Every primal instinct in my entire physical body screamed at me to aggressively drive back to the lakefront mansion right now. My deepest, most visceral urge was to violently kick the heavy front doors wide open. I wanted to aggressively confront them with the damning, undeniable toxicology report in my hand. I wanted to furiously throw them out onto the wet street with absolutely nothing but the expensive clothes currently on their backs. I deeply wanted to scream to demand immediate answers, to forcefully shake my daughter and ask her how she could possibly do this to her own father. But the exceptionally cold, highly rational part of my brain instantly clamped down on that fiery, reckless impulse. This was the same disciplined, calculating part of my mind that had successfully survived 40 long years of cutthroat, high-stakes corporate negotiations. If I foolishly confronted them right now in the heat of this agonizing moment, they would simply deny everything. Valerie was a seasoned master of public relations, an absolute industry expert at successfully spinning catastrophic, damaging narratives into harmless, innocent misunderstandings. She would easily cry theatrical tears, she would act deeply, profoundly offended, and she would undoubtedly claim the private lab made a terrible, tragic testing mistake. Or far worse, she would weaponize my direct accusation. She would successfully use my anger as further heavily documented proof of my supposedly worsening paranoid dementia. She would immediately call the local police, show them carefully edited videos of my recent confusion, and dramatically tell them her poor, sick, aging father was having a severe, violent, and dangerous psychotic break. No, a direct emotional and loud confrontation was an absolute fool's game. It was a massive tactical error I simply could not afford to make right now. Before I could effectively strike back, I needed to gather more information. Before I could utterly destroy the comfortable, highly parasitic, and luxurious lives they had greedily built on my dime, I needed to understand their ultimate goal. I now knew exactly how they were systematically destroying my mind and my body. But I did not yet logically know exactly why they were doing it. Why were they in such a desperate, highly dangerous, and reckless rush to completely erase my mind tonight? What hidden, terrifying, and urgent deadline were they secretly facing behind my back? I needed to completely uncover their underlying hidden financial or deeply personal motive before I finally snapped the heavy steel trap shut on their necks. I could not simply react like a wounded animal. I had to operate like an architect. Every single countermeasure I deployed from this exact moment forward needed to be flawless, meticulously designed, and legally impenetrable. I would let them blindly believe they were successfully winning their sick, twisted game. I would gladly play the pathetic part of the fading, forgetful old man for just a little while longer. I would let them comfortably dig their own graves. Then I would permanently bury them. The evening commute back to my lakefront mansion felt entirely different than any drive I had ever taken in my long life. I was no longer a grieving widower returning to an empty, echoing house. I was a veteran commander deliberately walking into an active, highly dangerous war zone. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a heavy, damp chill in the Seattle air. I parked my car in the expansive garage, taking a deep breath to steady my racing pulse. I needed my physical demeanor to perfectly match the tragic, decaying profile my daughter and her husband were so desperately hoping to see. I let my shoulders slump forward just a fraction. I relaxed my facial muscles, allowing a soft, slightly vacant expression to settle over my features. I dragged my left foot just a tiny bit as I walked across the polished concrete floor. The door leading into the main house clicked open, and the rich, savory smell of roasted chicken and garlic filled the air. It was a perfectly domestic, profoundly comforting scent that violently contrasted with the dark, venomous reality of what was truly happening beneath my roof. I stepped into the brightly lit kitchen. Valerie was standing by the large marble island, casually tossing a fresh green salad with a pair of wooden tongs. Derek was sitting at the heavy oak dining table, swiping aimlessly on his expensive smartphone. They both looked up as I entered the room. Their faces instantly shifted into those familiar, flawlessly constructed masks of loving concern. "Oh, Dad, you are back," Valerie said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet, entirely fabricated warmth. "We were just about to sit down and eat. You must be completely exhausted after being out all day long. Come sit down and let me serve you a nice hot plate." I gave her a slow, grateful smile, shuffling my feet as I approached the dining table. "Thank you, sweetheart," I murmured, letting my voice waver just the slightest bit. "I really am feeling quite tired this evening." I took my usual seat at the head of the long table. Derek placed his phone face down on the wood and looked at me with a perfectly practiced expression of mild pity. Valerie plated the food setting a large portion of chicken and roasted vegetables directly in front of me. I looked at the meal, my stomach churning with pure disgust. I knew I could not safely consume a single bite of anything she prepared. I quietly planned to simply push the food around my plate, taking tiny harmless nibbles of the dry bread roll I had watched her pull from a sealed plastic bag. As we settled into the meal, I decided it was the perfect time to test the structural integrity of my new performance. I needed to see exactly how they would react to a sudden, highly visible symptom of my supposed cognitive decline. I slowly lifted my head, letting my eyes glaze over as I stared directly across the table at my son-in-law. I blinked several times, narrowing my eyes as if I were struggling intensely to recognize his face. "Thomas," I said, my voice thick with convincing confusion. "Thomas, did you remember to double-check the concrete forms on the third floor of the downtown project site?" The structural load-bearing calculations looked a little bit off to me this morning. The dining room went completely, terrifyingly silent. Derek froze with a forkful of roasted chicken halfway to his open mouth. His eyes darted nervously toward his wife. Thomas was the name of my old trusted construction foreman, a man who had tragically passed away more than 15 years ago. I kept my face perfectly blank, maintaining the lost, searching gaze of a man whose mind was rapidly deteriorating into shadows. Derek slowly lowered his silver fork back onto his ceramic plate. "Victor," he said, his voice hesitant and visibly uncomfortable. "It is me, Derek. I am not Thomas. You are sitting at home right now. We are eating dinner together." I blinked rapidly, shaking my head as if trying to physically dislodge a thick, heavy fog from my brain. "Derek," I whispered, looking around the dining room with wide, frightened eyes. "Of course you are Derek. I am so sorry. I do not know why I just said that. My mind feels so incredibly cloudy today. I just feel so lost sometimes." Underneath the table, hidden by the long white tablecloth, my hands were curled into tight, furious fists. But outwardly, I was the perfect picture of a crumbling, helpless victim. I lowered my gaze, staring down at my plate in mock shame. Through the lower periphery of my vision, I carefully watched my daughter. Valerie was not looking at me with shock or sorrow. She was looking at me with pure, unadulterated triumph. She slowly lowered her right hand beneath the edge of the dining table. I kept my head bowed, but my eyes tracked her every subtle movement. I saw the faint, telltale glow of a digital screen illuminating the dark fabric of her expensive slacks. She had her smartphone in her hand. The camera lens was pointed directly at me, angled perfectly to capture my manufactured moment of pathetic elderly confusion. She was secretly recording my performance. She was actively gathering the fabricated, highly manipulated medical evidence she needed to justify throwing me into a locked psychiatric facility. My own daughter was documenting my tragic downfall with the cold, detached precision of a documentary filmmaker. The sheer calculated cruelty of her secret action sent a fresh, burning wave of adrenaline crashing through my tired veins. I wanted to reach across the wide table, snatch the device from her treacherous hands, and smash it against the hardwood floor. I wanted to expose her lies right then and there. But the seasoned, patient predator inside my mind held me firmly in place. I had to let her gather her fake evidence. I had to let her feel completely untouchably secure in her wicked plan. "Oh, Dad." Valerie cooed, her voice softening into a mockingly gentle, entirely patronizing tone. "Do not worry about it at all. We all have moments of confusion. You just need to get some proper rest tonight. We are going to take excellent care of you, I promise." I nodded weakly, continuing to push the pieces of roasted chicken around my plate. "Thank you, Valerie," I mumbled softly. "You are a very good daughter." The words tasted like absolute ash in my dry mouth. I forced myself to swallow the bitter disgust, maintaining the necessary illusion. The dinner dragged on, an agonizing theater of fake smiles and hidden agendas. I answered their mundane questions with slow, deliberate hesitation. I acted as though every single thought required a monumental, exhausting effort to process and articulate. They bought the performance completely. They were so blinded by their own greed, so entirely confident in their chemical cocktail, that they could not see the highly dangerous calculating architect hiding just behind my cloudy eyes. But amidst the heavy tension of the meal, my gaze naturally drifted toward the far end of the dining table. Sitting there, completely silent and entirely still, was my 10-year-old grandson, Leo. He was Valerie and Derek's only child, and he was the absolute light of my life. Normally, Leo would run to greet me the second I walked through the door. He would eagerly talk my ear off about his day at school, his video games, and his friends. We would laugh and joke, sharing a bond that brought immense joy to my aging heart. But tonight, Leo was acting completely different. I watched him closely, the fake confusion melting away from my internal thoughts as genuine, profound alarm took hold. The boy was trembling. I could clearly see his small, fragile shoulders shaking beneath his dark blue cotton shirt. He was staring intensely down at his half-eaten plate of food, refusing to lift his head. He absolutely refused to meet my gaze. "Hey there, buddy," I said gently, trying to inject some normal, familiar warmth into my voice. "How was your day at school today? Did you have fun playing with your friends?" Leo flinched violently at the sound of my voice. It was not a small, nervous twitch. It was a massive, full-body shudder of pure, instinctual fear. He slowly raised his head, and when his wide, tear-filled eyes finally met mine, my heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. He was not looking at his loving grandfather. He was looking at a terrifying, unpredictable monster. He slowly raised his trembling hands and physically pushed his plate away from him in absolute terror. Dinner ended in a suffocating atmosphere of strained, uncomfortable silence. Valerie quickly ushered Derek into the kitchen to clean the dishes, while I excused myself, citing a sudden heavy wave of exhaustion. I walked heavily up the grand curved staircase of my home, leaning heavily on the polished mahogany handrail to maintain my performance. The large house was incredibly quiet save for the muffled clinking of silverware downstairs. But as I reached the long, dimly lit second-floor hallway, I heard a sound that immediately stopped me in my tracks. It was a soft, ragged sound. Someone was weeping. I moved quietly down the carpeted corridor, stepping lightly toward the source of the distress. Outside the master guest bedroom, tucked into a dark alcove near a large bay window, sat my grandson. Leo was huddled on the floor, his knees pulled tightly against his small chest. His face was buried deep in his arms, and his entire body shook with quiet, muffled sobs. He was trying so desperately to cry without making a single solitary sound. My heavy heart clenched painfully. I completely forgot all about the performance. I forgot about being the confused, fragile old man. In that moment, I was only a grandfather, desperate to comfort the child he loved more than life itself. I knelt down slowly on the soft carpet, keeping my movements gentle and deliberate. "Leo," I whispered softly, reaching out my right hand to touch his quivering shoulder. "Buddy, what is wrong? Why are you out here crying in the dark?" The reaction was instantaneous and completely horrifying. The very second my fingers brushed against his soft cotton shirt. Leo gasped sharply. He flinched away from me with a violent jerk, his back slamming hard against the decorative wooden wainscoting of the hallway wall. He scrambled backward, pulling his knees even tighter, his eyes wide and completely blown out with sheer panic. He looked at me as if I were a wild, rabid animal about to strike. "Please do not hurt me, Grandpa," he pleaded, his voice cracking into a high, terrified pitch. I froze completely, my hand still suspended in the empty air between us. The air in my lungs suddenly felt exactly like crushed glass. I slowly lowered my hand, resting it flat on my own knee, to show I was absolutely not a threat. "I am not going to hurt you, Leo," I said, keeping my voice as calm and soothing as humanly possible. "I would never, ever hurt you. You know me, buddy. It is just Grandpa." "Why would you ever think I would hurt you?" Leo swallowed hard, a fresh tear sliding down his pale cheek. He looked down at his sneakers, his small chest heaving with silent hiccups. "Mom told me," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly I had to lean in close to hear the devastating words. "She told me what is happening to you. She said you are getting very sick." What exactly did your mother tell you, Leo? I asked, the blood in my veins turning to absolute ice. Leo sniffled, finally looking up into my eyes. Mom says your brain is rotting, Grandpa. She says you are forgetting everything and that you are turning into a totally different person. She says you might go crazy and hurt me at night when I am sleeping. She told me I have to lock my bedroom door and never be alone with you. Are you going to hurt me, Grandpa? Are you turning into a monster? The sheer, unadulterated evil of those terrible words struck me with the intense force of a physical blow. Valerie was not just content with secretly poisoning my physical body. She was not just satisfied with slowly stealing my hard-earned wealth and chemically erasing my cognitive function. She was actively, maliciously weaponizing her own innocent child. She was deliberately inflicting severe, lasting psychological trauma on her 10-year-old son, twisting his profound love for me into paralyzing terror. She was callously using his genuine innocent fear to meticulously construct her sick, twisted narrative. When the authorities or the doctors eventually questioned the family about my supposed mental decline, she would eagerly present a terrified child who was deeply afraid of his own grandfather. She was using Leo as the ultimate heartbreaking prop in her vile sociopathic theater production. I felt a single hot tear slip down my own cheek, but I quickly wiped it away. I moved forward carefully, completely, ignoring his initial instinct to shrink away, and I wrapped my arms securely around his small, trembling frame. I pulled him tightly against my chest, burying my face deep in his soft hair. "Listen to me very carefully, Leo," I whispered, my voice thick with raw, fiercely protective emotion. "Your mother is completely wrong. My brain is definitely not rotting. I am not going crazy. And I will never ever let anyone hurt you. I love you more than anything in this entire world. Do you hear me? I am right here. I am still your grandpa, and I am perfectly fine." Leo slowly wrapped his small arms around my neck, burying his wet face in my shoulder. He held on to me as if he were drowning, letting out a long, shuddering breath of profound relief. I held him there in the dimly lit hallway for a very long time, gently rocking him back and forth, until his sobs finally subsided and his breathing steadied into a calm, rhythmic pattern. I stood up, lifting him easily into my strong arms, and carried him quietly into his bedroom. I tucked the warm blankets tightly around his narrow shoulders, brushing a stray lock of dark hair from his forehead. I sat patiently on the edge of his mattress until his tired eyes drifted shut and he fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. When I finally walked out of his quiet room and silently closed the heavy wooden door, the profound sorrow in my aching heart instantly evaporated. It was entirely replaced by a pure, cold-blooded, and absolute rage. Poisoning my coffee was a pathetic, cowardly declaration of simple financial greed. But deliberately terrorizing my innocent grandson was an absolute, unforgivable declaration of total war. I walked purposefully down the long hall to my own master bedroom, locking the sturdy door firmly behind me. I reached under the bed and deliberately pulled out a secure, highly encrypted laptop from my hidden fireproof floor safe. I slowly opened the metallic lid, the bright screen casting a harsh, pale blue glow across my determined, unyielding face. I did not need to sleep at all tonight. I needed to execute a flawless, utterly devastating counterattack. Every single document, every legal loophole, every hidden asset would be weaponized against them. I would utilize all of my vast financial resources and powerful connections to permanently dismantle the false narrative they were actively building. I was not fighting for my own survival anymore. I was fighting to protect Leo from their devastating toxic influence. Because starting tomorrow morning, I was going to systematically, ruthlessly burn their entire deceptive world right down to the bare, smoking ground. I left the mansion just after dawn. I left a hastily scrawled note on the kitchen island, claiming I had an early morning fishing trip with old union buddies. It was a perfectly mundane excuse, the kind of harmless elderly activity they would expect and completely ignore. I drove straight into the heart of downtown Seattle, My destination was a sleek, glass-fronted skyscraper that housed the law firm of Mitchell Reed. Mitchell was not a family lawyer who held hands and negotiated amicable settlements. He was a ruthless, seasoned veteran of corporate warfare and hostile estate litigation. He was a man who specialized in dismantling empires and burying the opposition under a mountain of irrefutable legal paperwork. I had known him for 20 years. He was the shark I kept on retainer for my largest, most aggressive commercial contracts. Today, I needed him for something far more personal and infinitely more dangerous. I stepped off the private elevator and walked into his expansive, minimalist office. Mitchell was waiting for me behind a massive obsidian desk. He was a lean, sharp-featured man with predatory eyes and a tailored suit that cost more than a reliable car. He stood up, offering a firm, businesslike handshake. "Victor," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "You sounded urgent on the phone. Sit down and tell me exactly what is going on." I did not waste time with pleasantries or emotional vulnerability. I was an engineer presenting a critical structural failure. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the stark, undeniable evidence. I laid the certified laboratory toxicology report squarely on his pristine desk. I followed it with a detailed handwritten log I had compiled throughout the sleepless night, chronicling every instance of their gaslighting, every fake moment of concern, and the horrifying truth of my grandson's manipulated terror. Mitchell picked up the lab report. He read the chemical breakdown with a completely impassive expression. He did not gasp. He did not offer useless sympathy. He had spent his entire career navigating the absolute darkest, most twisted corners of human greed. He simply set the paper down, steepled his fingers, and looked directly into my eyes. "Scopolamine," he stated flatly. "They are methodically poisoning you to simulate advanced aggressive dementia. They want medical power of attorney. They want total legal control over your estate, your bank accounts, and your life. And they want you locked away in a memory care facility where your protests will be treated as nothing more than tragic symptoms of a rotting brain." I nodded, my jaw clenched so tightly my teeth ached. That is exactly their plan, but I need to know why they are rushing. Valerie has always been ambitious, but this is a desperate, incredibly reckless escalation. They are risking multiple felony charges for attempted murder and elder abuse. What is pushing them to cross this line right now? Mitchell pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Send the forensic team into my office immediately," he ordered. He turned his sharp gaze back to me. "We are going to find out exactly what is driving them, Victor. If people take massive, irrational risks, it means they are terrified of a looming consequence. We will follow the money. It never lies." Within 3 minutes, 4 highly specialized financial analysts entered the room. Mitchell handed them the authorization forms I had just signed, granting them complete unfettered access to all my personal and corporate financial records. He gave them a terrifyingly simple directive. "Rip the financial lives of Valerie and Derek apart," he commanded. "Pull every public record, every credit report, and every private bank statement you can legally access. Look for hidden debt, offshore transfers, sudden liquidation swings, and any association with high-risk holding companies. Find the bleeding artery." For the next 5 hours, I sat in that quiet, climate-controlled office, while Mitchell's team worked with silent, brutal efficiency. They projected spreadsheets and bank records onto a large glass monitor mounted on the wall. I watched as they methodically tracked every single dollar that had flowed into and out of my daughter's accounts over the past 3 years. I saw the massive seed money I had generously given Valerie for her public relations firm. I saw the substantial mortgage payments I had unknowingly subsidized. But then the analysts began to uncover the dark hidden layers beneath their polished, wealthy facade. The numbers painted a story of catastrophic, spiraling failure. Derek's supposedly thriving investment business was a complete and utter illusion. The forensic audit revealed a shocking string of disastrous, highly leveraged bets on volatile shell companies. He had lost millions of dollars in a matter of months. But he had not just lost his own money. The analysts tracked a series of desperate, frantic wire transfers. Derek had been quietly siphoning money from Valerie's public relations firm to cover his mounting catastrophic losses. When that well ran completely dry, they had turned to high-interest predatory lenders to keep their luxurious lifestyle afloat. They were living in a desperate, collapsing house of cards, constantly shifting imaginary money just to survive another week. This still does not explain the urgency, I murmured, watching the red numbers multiply on the glowing screen. People go bankrupt every single day. They lose their homes and their businesses. They do not suddenly decide to poison their own father with military-grade narcotics just to avoid filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. There has to be a catalyst, a severe, immediate threat. Mitchell agreed, pacing slowly behind his obsidian desk. You are right, Victor. Standard creditors use lawyers and collection agencies. They garnish wages and seize assets. They do not inspire the kind of pure, reckless panic required to initiate a lethal chemical protocol. They owe a massive debt to someone who does not use the legal system to collect. We need to look deeper into these offshore transfers. We need to identify the exact entities holding their toxic debt. The afternoon dragged on, the tension in the room growing heavier with each passing hour. I drank bitter black coffee, my mind racing through 1,000 different scenarios. I thought about little Leo trembling in the dark hallway, absolutely terrified of the monster his mother had invented. My resolve hardened into an unbreakable solid block of steel. I would dismantle their entire existence. I would strip them of everything they valued, and I would take my grandson far away from their toxic, poisonous influence. I just needed the final piece of the puzzle. I needed the ultimate weapon to use against them. The heavy wooden door of the office suddenly opened. Mitchell's lead investigative assistant walked in. He was a young, sharp man, but right now his face was completely pale. He was holding a thick, bright red file folder. He walked directly over to Mitchell and handed him the document without saying a single word. He simply nodded toward the contents, his eyes wide with genuine, unmistakable fear. Mitchell opened the red folder. He read the top page, his predatory eyes scanning the black text with rapid, calculating precision. I watched as his normally impassive, hardened face slowly turned incredibly grim. The silence in the room became absolute, thick, and suffocating. Mitchell slowly closed the red folder and placed his hands flat on the desk. He looked up at me, the weight of the revelation hanging heavily in the quiet air. Victor, he said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, deadly whisper. They are not just broke. They are not just trying to steal your money to maintain their rich lifestyle. They are not just trying to put you in a nursing home. They borrowed $4 million from a shadow holding company in Mexico. They lost it all. They are desperately trying to save themselves from a cartel. I stared at Mitchell, the heavy silence of the office pressing down on my chest. The word hung in the air between us, toxic and suffocating. A cartel. It was not a bad investment or a foolish gamble on the stock market. Derek had borrowed money from ruthless killers. Mitchell slowly turned the pages of the red folder, laying out the irrefutable, terrifying evidence across the gleaming surface of his desk. He explained the brutal reality of their situation with cold, clinical precision. Derek had engaged in massive underwater commercial margin trading. He had leveraged assets he did not actually own to borrow enormous sums of cash from incredibly shady offshore lenders based in Sinaloa. When the market violently shifted, the shadow holding company immediately demanded their capital back. They did not send polite collection notices. They sent death threats. But that is not the worst part, Victor, Mitchell said, his voice lowering into a grim register. Derek is a coward, but he is a desperate coward. To save his own skin, he has actively used your name to manufacture his escape route. He pointed to a thick stack of stapled legal documents in the center of the desk. My forensic team just pulled these from the county records office an hour ago. Derek has fraudulently taken out a massive $5 million commercial mortgage. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the obsidian desk so tightly my knuckles turned completely white. A $5 million mortgage on what exactly? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. On your prime commercial lots down by the waterfront, Mitchell replied without hesitation. The 3 empty, highly coveted parcels of land you have owned free and clear for 2 decades. Derek forged your signature on every single document. He perfectly replicated your handwriting, probably tracing it from old contracts he found in your home office. He bypassed standard banking protocols by using a corrupt independent loan broker who was entirely willing to look the other way for a hefty illegal commission. The loan was quietly approved last week. The funds are currently sitting in a heavily guarded escrow account. My mind raced assembling the horrifying pieces of their grand sociopathic design. But Derek cannot simply access an escrow account in my name, I stated, shaking my head. The title company requires strict in-person verification to release a $5 million wire transfer. He would need me standing right there in the room holding a pen and a valid identification card. Mitchell nodded slowly, his eyes locking onto mine with piercing intensity. Exactly, Victor. He needs you. Or more accurately, he needs your total incapacitation. He reached into the red folder and produced another document. It was a comprehensive medical and financial power of attorney. My signature was at the bottom alongside the official seal of a corrupt public notary. It was another flawless, devastating forgery. It explicitly granted my daughter Valerie absolute, unquestionable legal control over my entire estate, my banking accounts, and my medical decisions in the event of my cognitive failure. This is the catalyst, Mitchell explained, tapping the forged power of attorney. This is why they are rushing. This is why the chemical poisoning has aggressively escalated. The offshore lenders have given Derek a hard, non-negotiable deadline. The $5 million margin debt is officially due next Friday. If he does not wire the funds to their shadow accounts by the close of business next Friday, those people will simply kill him. And they might kill Valerie and your grandson Leo, just to make a brutal example. The sheer terrifying magnitude of their plot suddenly crystallized in my mind. The lethal cocktail of scopolamine and sedatives was not just a slow, cruel game. It was a ticking time bomb. They needed me to break completely tonight. If they could successfully induce a massive, undeniable, psychotic break tonight, they could immediately call the emergency services. They would have me involuntarily committed to a locked psychiatric ward by tomorrow morning. With me securely locked away and medically deemed legally incompetent, Valerie could instantly activate this forged power of attorney. She would march into the title company on Monday morning as my sole legal guardian. She would authorize the immediate release of the $5 million escrow funds. They would wire the cash directly to the cartel, pay off this deadly debt, and save their own lives using my hard-earned fortune. And I would be left to slowly rot in a heavily medicated haze locked inside a padded room for the rest of my miserable, shortened life. I stood up from the leather chair, my chest heaving with a dark, primal fury. They are willing to destroy my brain and lock me in an asylum to save themselves, I muttered, pacing the length of the silent office. They are willing to leave my innocent 10-year-old grandson completely traumatized, terrified of his own grandfather, just to cover up their reckless, greedy mistakes. Mitchell watched me pace, his expression unreadable. We have enough hard, irrefutable evidence right here in this room to put both of them away for a very long time, Victor. We have the forged commercial mortgage. We have the fraudulent power of attorney. We have the certified laboratory toxicology report proving the deliberate systemic poisoning. I can pick up this telephone right now and call the district attorney. We can have a small army of police officers waiting at your mansion before you even drive home. We can arrest them tonight. I stopped pacing. I looked at the black telephone sitting on the corner of his desk. I thought about the police cars pulling up to my peaceful lakefront property with their red and blue lights flashing. I thought about the officers dragging my daughter out in metal handcuffs, while my frightened grandson watched from the top of the stairs, screaming and crying in the torque. I thought about the endless, messy legal battles, the public trials, the aggressive defense attorneys trying to poke holes in our forensic evidence. If we arrest them now, they will claim they knew absolutely nothing about the forged documents. Derek will try to blame the corrupt loan broker. Valerie will shed her fake tears and claim she was only trying to protect her sick, confused father. They will endlessly drag this out in court for years, draining my resources and torturing my grandson. No, I said, my voice echoing with a cold, terrifying certainty. Do not call the police, Mitchell. Mitchell frowned, crossing his arms over his tailored suit. If you go back to that house tonight, you are risking your life, Victor. I am not going to be a victim anymore, Mitchell, I replied, staring down at the fraudulent documents. I refuse to let them spin a pathetic story to a sympathetic jury. I want them caught entirely red-handed. Tomorrow I will permanently end this terrifying nightmare. I carefully gathered my heavy leather briefcase. I turned around and walked out into the damp, dark Seattle evening. The cold rain began falling once again. I was finally prepared to unleash hell upon them without any mercy or regret. The cold rain continued to fall as I drove away from Mitchell Reed's office. I did not go straight back to the lakefront mansion. Instead, I drove to a discreet hotel, paying for a room in cash. I needed an isolated place to coordinate the tactical strike that would dismantle my daughter's twisted reality. I sat on the pristine bed and made a single phone call to Marcus Vance, a former intelligence officer who ran an elite private security firm specializing in corporate espionage. I explained the entire situation to him with brutal, unflinching clarity. I told him money was absolutely no object. I needed his best team tomorrow. The following afternoon presented the perfect window. Valerie and Derek had eagerly RSVP'd to an exclusive charity dinner party in downtown Bellevue. They were leaving the house at 5 and would not return until well past 10. They told me to order delivery and get plenty of rest, their faces arranged in flawless masks of fabricated concern. I smiled, warmly assured them I would be fine, and watched from the front window as their vehicle pulled out of the driveway. The second their taillights vanished, my fragile demeanor evaporated. I picked up my phone and sent a predetermined text message. 10 minutes later, a fleet of 3 unmarked dark gray utility vehicles rolled quietly up to my property. Marcus stepped out, accompanied by a team of 6 silent technicians carrying reinforced equipment cases. They moved with a terrifying military efficiency that instantly put my mind at ease. I let them through the heavy front doors, and the massive mansion was immediately transformed into a coordinated tactical operation. I need total visual and audio coverage of the primary living spaces, I instructed Marcus, my voice echoing slightly in the grand foyer. I need to capture every whisper, every subtle movement, and every exact ingredient she puts into my food. They cannot have a single blind spot. Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the high ceilings. We brought the newest microscopic optics available on the private market, he replied, his tone strictly professional. We are installing 5 highly concealed camera units. They are equipped with low-light sensors and parabolic microphones. They will capture a whisper from 40 feet away with pristine clarity. I watched with cold, detached fascination as his team systematically rigged my home. The first camera was seamlessly embedded inside the carved wood of the living room mantel, angled to capture the seating area where they staged my supposed moments of confusion. The second and third units were meticulously hidden inside the kitchen. One was tucked behind a decorative exhaust vent, directly above the marble island where Valerie prepared her poisonous cocktails. The other was angled toward the primary preparation counters. The fourth camera was installed in my private study, hidden inside an antique encyclopedia sitting on the highest bookshelf. This lens had a clear view of my desk and the floor safe where I kept my private documents. The fifth camera was placed high in the corner of the dining room, specifically positioned to record the suffocating dinners where they tortured my innocent grandson. By 8 o'clock, the elaborate installation was finished. The technicians wiped away every microscopic trace of their presence. They adjusted the lighting, straightened the rugs, and ensured the mansion looked exactly as it had when Valerie and Derek left. There was absolutely nothing to indicate that the quiet house was now a fully operational, lethal surveillance trap. Marcus led me out the back door, and we walked 2 blocks down the dark street to a quiet cul-de-sac. Parked deep in the shadows beneath a weeping willow tree was a heavily modified black security van. The rear doors slid open, revealing a glowing command center. Mitchell Reed was already inside, wearing a dark turtleneck and a grim expression. He was flanked by 3 private investigators, all staring intently at a bank of high-definition monitors. "Welcome to the war room," Victor Mitchell said, gesturing toward an empty leather chair. I stepped inside the mobile command center, feeling the steady hum of the massive server racks. I sat down and looked at the bright screens. The visual clarity was breathtaking. I could see every corner of my kitchen, my living room, my study, and my dining room in perfect razor-sharp focus. The colors were rich, the shadows deeply defined, and the audio feeds picked up the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. "We have a secure uplink directly to our remote servers," Marcus explained. "The moment they walk through those doors, every word they speak and every action they take will be permanently recorded and legally preserved. If they try to activate that forged mortgage or slip another dose of scopolamine into your drink, we will have them completely trapped. There will be absolutely no deniability. No clever public relations spin will save them from this." I nodded slowly, a profound, icy calm settling deep within my chest. I watched the empty rooms on the monitors, preparing my mind for the final, agonizing performance. I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to walk back into that house, sit in my armchair, and willingly play the part of the decaying victim one last time. I had to let them confidently spring their trap, knowing I held the detonator to their absolute destruction. I stood up, adjusting the collar of my shirt. "I am going back inside," I told Mitchell, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. "I will sit in the living room and wait for them to return. You monitor the feeds. When I give the signal, you bring the hammer down." Mitchell nodded firmly. "We have your back, Victor. We will not miss a second." I stepped out of the dark security van and walked slowly back to the mansion. The cold night air felt sharp against my face. I unlocked the heavy front door, stepped inside, and deliberately locked it behind me. The house was completely silent. I walked into the living room, turned on a single reading lamp, and sat down in my favorite leather armchair. I arranged a thick woolen blanket over my lap, adopting the frail posture of a man rapidly losing his grip on reality. I stared at the dark wall, regulating my breathing, waiting for the final act of this grotesque play to begin. The silence stretched for a very long time, broken only by the ticking of the antique hallway clock. The tension in my aging muscles was truly immense, a coiled spring ready to snap. Then the sudden sharp vibration of my mobile phone broke the quiet room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the device. The screen illuminated the dim room, displaying a new text message. The sender was Valerie. The words on the small screen were bright, cheerful, and saturated with a deeply terrifying, calculated malice. "We are on our way home, Dad. I had a wonderful time, but I am so worried about your health. I bought you your favorite herbal tea for tonight." I stared at the screen of my mobile device, letting the sheer audacity of her message sink into my bones. Your favorite herbal tea. The vehicle of my intended destruction, presented as an act of loving devotion. I placed the phone face down on the small wooden side table next to my armchair. I leaned my head back, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the house was absolute, thick and expectant, like the heavy atmosphere right before a massive thunderstorm breaks. Marcus and Mitchell were watching from the security van down the street, their eyes fixed on the high-definition monitors. I was not alone in this house. I closed my eyes and began to prepare my mind, slowly stripping away the sharp, calculating intellect of Victor the engineer. I replaced it with the crumbling persona of the failing old man. I practiced slowing my breathing, letting my jaw hang slightly slack, allowing a dull, vacant glaze to completely overtake my sharp vision. I was entirely ready. 10 minutes later, the distinct hum of a luxury engine echoed through the quiet neighborhood. The headlights of Derek's heavy sport utility vehicle swept across the front windows, casting long, moving shadows across the living room walls. I heard the heavy car doors slam shut, followed by the crisp, rhythmic clicking of Valerie's expensive heels on the stone walkway leading to the front porch. The brass lock tumbled, and the heavy oak door swung open with a soft creak. "Hello, we are home," Valerie called out, her voice unnaturally loud and laced with that sickening, performative cheerfulness. "Dad, are you still awake in there?" "Awaken." I did not answer immediately. I waited, forcing them to come looking for me. I heard their footsteps transition from the hardwood foyer to the thick carpet of the living room. Derek rounded the corner first, pausing when he saw me sitting in the dim light. I let a few seconds pass before I slowly turned my head toward him. I blinked several times, my eyes drifting aimlessly past his face as if I were struggling to anchor myself to reality. "Martha," I whispered, my voice cracked and dry, intentionally using my late wife's name. "Martha, is that you? The rain is coming in through the roof again. We need to call the contractors." Derek froze, his posture stiffening. He looked over his shoulder, signaling to his wife. Valerie quickly stepped into the room, her eyes instantly scanning my disheveled appearance. A triumphant gleam flashed across her features so fast that an ordinary observer would have completely missed it. But I was not an ordinary observer. I was the architect of this trap, and every microscopic hidden camera in the room was silently recording her treacherous face. "Oh, Dad," Valerie sighed, rushing forward with heavily exaggerated concern. She knelt beside my leather chair, placing her cold hand over my own. "It is me, Valerie. Mom has been gone for a long time, remember? You are just having a little bit of a confused night. Let us get you up and moving. A nice warm drink will help settle your nerves." She gripped my forearm and pulled me upward. I allowed my legs to buckle slightly, forcing Derek to step forward and catch my weight. I leaned heavily against him, letting out a soft, confused groan. I shuffled my feet, dragging the toes of my slippers across the carpet as they guided me toward the brightly lit kitchen. Every clumsy, uncoordinated movement I made was meticulously calculated. I was feeding them the exact narrative they desperately needed to execute their $5 million fraud. I was giving them the perfect medical justification to lock me away forever. As we entered the kitchen, the glaring overhead lights seemed to physically hurt my eyes. I squinted, raising a trembling hand to shield my face. I stumbled sideways, deliberately knocking into the edge of the marble island. My elbow caught a tall, decorative water glass resting near the edge. The heavy crystal tumbled off the counter, crashing onto the hard tile floor and shattering into 100 jagged, glittering pieces. I gasped, shrinking back against the wooden cabinets, wrapping my arms around my chest in a display of pathetic, childlike terror. "I am sorry," I whimpered, staring down at the broken glass. "I am so incredibly sorry. I just cannot seem to hold on to anything anymore. My hands will simply not work." Derek let out a heavy, irritated sigh, immediately reaching for a broom. But Valerie did not move to clean up the dangerous mess. Instead, she stepped back, creating a clear, unobstructed line of sight between herself and my cowering form. I kept my head bowed, my shoulders shaking with manufactured fear, but my eyes remained sharp and entirely focused beneath my furrowed brow. I watched as Valerie slowly reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out her sleek mobile phone, holding it discreetly against her stomach. I saw the tiny red recording light blink on. She was filming my humiliation. She was filming her own father cowering over broken glass, expertly curating the tragic, undeniable visual evidence she would present to a judge on Monday morning. She looked up from her screen, locking eyes with Derek across the kitchen. I saw it then. The silent, undeniable communication between two predators. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It was a nod of absolute arrogant victory. It clearly said that I was completely broken, that their sinister plan was working flawlessly, and that the cartel debt would soon be washed away by my stolen millions. Inside my mind, the cold, calculating engineer was watching them fall deeper and deeper into the maze. They had absolutely no idea that while Valerie was secretly recording my fake deterioration, a microscopic high-definition camera hidden inside the kitchen exhaust vent was currently recording her secretly recording me. Every single layer of their deception, every cruel nod, every fabricated tear was streaming live to a secure server surrounded by highly trained legal investigators. They were actively building their own prison bars, and I was quietly supplying all the necessary steel. "Let us just get you to the table, Dad," Valerie said, slipping her phone back into her purse. She expertly shifted her facial expression back to one of deeply sorrowful pity. "Derek, leave the glass. Just help him sit down before he hurts himself." Derek guided me to a wooden chair at the small breakfast nook. I sat down heavily, resting my forehead against my hands. I kept my breathing entirely erratic and shallow. I listened as Valerie moved toward the stainless steel stove. I heard the subtle rustle of a tiny plastic bag. I heard the faint sound of powder being tapped into a ceramic mug. She was actively preparing the final lethal dose right in front of the hidden camera. I slowly raised my head, looking up at her with profound, weary confusion. Valerie leaned down gently, placing the steaming poisoned cup directly in front of me. She smiled, her eyes empty of any human emotion. "Drink this, Dad," she whispered softly, her voice echoing. "It will help you sleep deeply, very deeply." I sat there silently and stared down at the dark, still surface of the steaming herbal tea. The porcelain mug was warm against my palms, sending a comforting domestic heat through my fingers that completely belied the deadly reality of its contents. A thin ribbon of steam curled upward, carrying the fragrant, earthy scent of chamomile and mint. It smelled exactly like the innocent remedies Martha used to brew for me when I had a cold. But I knew the horrifying truth hiding beneath the sweet aroma. I knew that swirling within this innocent-looking liquid was a massive, highly concentrated dose of scopolamine and heavy chemical sedatives. It was the absolute maximum capacity they dared to administer. It was the final devastating strike designed to permanently sever my last remaining ties to conscious reality. I could feel their eyes burning into the side of my face. Valerie and Derek were standing just a few feet away, watching me with the unblinking, predatory focus of starving hawks zeroing in on wounded prey. They needed me to take that very first fatal sip. They were waiting for the chemical cocktail to flood my system, to watch my eyes glaze over, to see my jaw go slack as the poison actively dissolved my memories and my free will. I slowly brought the rim of the heavy ceramic mug toward my lips, letting my hands tremble violently. The liquid splashed gently against the curved sides, threatening to spill over the brim. Inside my mind, I was furiously calculating the precise angles of the hidden cameras we had installed just hours ago. I knew the lens hidden behind the kitchen exhaust vent had a perfect, unobstructed view of this exact interaction. It was recording the intense, eager anticipation written across their treacherous two faces. "Come on, Dad," Valerie urged, her voice taking on a very slight, almost imperceptible edge of raw impatience beneath the sugary sweetness. "You need to drink it while it is still hot. It will do wonders for your nerves." I paused, letting the warm ceramic rest against my lower lip, without actually letting a single drop of the toxic liquid touch my tongue. I needed to execute this next maneuver with absolute, flawless precision. If they suspected for even a fraction of a second that I was fully lucid, if they realized I was actively rejecting the poison, the entire tactical operation would collapse in an instant. I would lose the vital element of absolute surprise. I needed a distraction, something so sudden and violently alarming that it would temporarily shatter their intense, hyper-focused observation. I took a short, shallow breath, purposely inhaling a tiny bit of my own saliva, and forced my body into a sudden, severe spasm. I hacked loudly, a wet, rattling sound that tore through the quiet kitchen. I violently jerked my head away from the steaming mug, letting out another deep, guttural cough that shook my entire chest cavity. I hunched my shoulders forward, gagging and sputtering, as if my lungs were suddenly failing me. "Oh my God!" "Dad," Valerie gasped, taking a quick, startled step backward as I continued to aggressively choke. Derek instantly recoiled in pure disgust, turning his face away from the sudden, messy display of elderly frailty. The distraction was working perfectly. I pushed myself up from the wooden chair, my movements clumsy, frantic, and highly uncoordinated. I let out a low wheeze, clutching my chest with one hand, while keeping a desperate, trembling grip on the poisoned mug with the other. "I desperately need some fresh air," I gasped out between loud, agonizing coughs. I staggered away from the breakfast nook, leaning heavily against the marble island for physical support. I stumbled blindly toward the expansive living room, waving my hand in the air as if begging them to stay back and give me some necessary breathing room. I knew the microscopic camera hidden inside the living room mantel was capturing my fake medical emergency, flawlessly recording every single detail for Mitchell's team. "Just give me a second." I wheezed, my chest heaving dramatically. I navigated the short distance to the large decorative potted ficus tree standing in the shadowy corner of the living room. It was a massive leafy plant sitting in a deep basin of dark, loose potting soil. It was exactly where I needed to be. I leaned over the heavy ceramic pot, letting out a final violent sequence of hacking coughs that forced me to bend completely in half. In that one precise split second of total misdirection, while my back was turned toward the kitchen and their vision was completely obscured by my hunched shoulders, I swiftly and smoothly tilted my wrist. I dumped the entire contents of the hot-laced tea directly into the dark soil hidden beneath the dense green leaves. The liquid vanished instantly into the dry dirt without making a single sound. Immediately, I relaxed my grip, letting the empty ceramic mug slip right through my fingers. It hit the thick, expensive Persian rug with a dull, heavy thud rolling harmlessly onto its side. I let out a long, shuddering groan, allowing my knees to completely buckle beneath my manufactured weight. I turned away from the plant, clutching my throat, and threw my body forward in a dramatic, uncontrolled descent. I collapsed heavily onto the plush, oversized leather sofa, situated in the center of the living room. I hit the cushions hard, letting my head loll backward against the smooth headrest. I allowed my eyelids to flutter rapidly before rolling my eyes up toward the ceiling, leaving only thin slivers of white visible beneath my lashes. I consciously forced my breathing to slow down, transforming my frantic gasps into deep, shallow, and highly irregular rasps. I let all the tension drain completely out of my facial muscles, letting my jaw hang slack and my arms fall lifelessly to my sides. To anyone watching, I was a man who had just suffered a catastrophic, debilitating medical event. I was a man who had finally succumbed to the overwhelming chemical assault on his fragile, aging brain. I heard the rapid, urgent clicking of Valerie's heels crossing the hardwood floor, followed closely by Derek's heavier, hesitant footsteps. They stood over my motionless body, their presence casting a dark, looming shadow across my face. I remained perfectly, terrifyingly still, focusing every ounce of my willpower on maintaining the shallow, ragged rhythm of my breathing. I did not twitch a single muscle. I did not swallow. I existed only as a hollow, empty vessel. Valerie leaned down, her expensive perfume filling my nostrils. I felt the sudden rush of displaced air as she slowly waved her manicured hand directly in front of my face, testing my lack of response. I did not blink. I did not react. A long, suffocating moment of pure silence stretched between us in the dimly lit room. Then I heard the subtle rustle of her clothing as she straightened her posture. "He is entirely gone now, Derek," she whispered, her voice totally devoid of any warmth or sorrow. "We finally have everything we need to take total control tomorrow morning." I remained frozen on the leather sofa, my chest rising and falling in a manufactured ragged rhythm. I listened as their footsteps retreated from the living room, heading toward the kitchen. The muted clinking of glassware and the soft hum of the refrigerator indicated they were pouring themselves a celebratory drink. They were toasting to their success, completely unaware that their every whispered congratulation was being recorded by the microscopic camera hidden in the mantel just a few feet above my head. The physical toll of maintaining this perfectly motionless state was immense. My muscles ached from the rigid tension, and a cold sweat gathered at the base of my neck. but the fiery rage burning deep within my chest provided an endless supply of adrenaline. I lay there in the dim light for what felt like an eternity, calculating the minutes as they slowly dragged into hours. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10, then 11, and finally the deep, resonant strikes of midnight echoed through the silent, expansive house. Just as the final chime faded into the heavy, stagnant air, the distinct sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway broke the silence. A heavy vehicle had pulled right up to the front entrance, bypassing the guest parking area entirely. The low, throaty rumble of a large engine idled for a moment before being abruptly cut off. I heard the muffled thud of heavy car doors slamming shut. The metallic click of the front door lock turning sent a sharp electric jolt straight down my spine. Derek had obviously left the door unlocked, waiting for their late-night guests. The heavy oak door swung open, letting in a sudden gust of damp, freezing wind that swept across the foyer and brushed against my face. Multiple sets of footsteps stepped onto the hardwood floor. They did not try to muffle their entrance. There was no hesitation, no respect for the sleeping household. They walked with the arrogant, heavy strides of people who firmly believed they were completely untouchable. Derek and Valerie rushed out of the kitchen to greet them, their voices hushed, but thick with a frantic, greedy energy. I kept my eyes closed, narrowing my eyelids, until only the absolute thinnest sliver of vision remained. Through my eyelashes, the dimly lit living room appeared as a shadowy, blurred canvas. I watched as 4 distinct figures moved into my field of view. Valerie and Derek led 2 unfamiliar men directly toward the leather sofa where I lay motionless. The first stranger was a tall, imposing man with an immaculate tailored silver suit and a neatly trimmed gray beard. He carried a pristine leather medical bag. He moved with a clinical, detached arrogance, his posture radiating a profound sense of superiority. This was not a desperate back-alley criminal. This was a man of status, someone who used a prestigious title to mask his profound underlying rot. The second man was shorter, heavier, and visibly sweating. He clutched a thick, worn leather briefcase against his chest like a physical shield. He wore a cheap, poorly fitting suit, and his eyes darted nervously around the grand living room, taking in the expensive artwork with naked greed. I knew exactly who they were, even before Valerie spoke a single word. Mitchell had warned me about the essential corrupted pieces they would desperately need to finalize their $5 million fraud. The tall man in the silver suit was the corrupt private psychiatrist, the highly paid medical professional entirely willing to diagnose my immediate, irreversible cognitive failure without ever conducting a genuine medical examination. The nervous, sweating man holding the briefcase was the shady public notary, the man whose official stamp would legally validate the forged signatures and permanently transfer my entire estate into their blood-stained hands. They stood in a loose circle around the sofa, staring down at my limp, supposedly broken body. The absolute lack of human empathy in the room was suffocating. "Is this the patient?" the psychiatrist asked, his voice smooth, resonant, and entirely devoid of any professional compassion. He set his leather medical bag down on the glass coffee table with a sharp clatter. "He looks remarkably stable for someone experiencing a catastrophic late-stage psychotic break. He just collapsed about an hour ago. Dr. Aris." Valerie lied smoothly, her tone shifting into a practiced, sorrowful whisper. "It has been a truly terrible, exhausting week. He has been highly agitated, hallucinating, and completely unable to recognize us. Tonight, he just suddenly went entirely blank. It is exactly like you predicted during our initial consultation." Dr. Aris chuckled softly, a dry, cynical sound that made my blood run absolutely cold. "My predictions are always highly accurate when the proper agreed-upon conditions are met," he said, his words dripping with a dark, undeniable double meaning. "I trust the financial arrangements for my late-night emergency consultation have been fully secured." Derek stepped forward, eagerly nodding his head. "The wire transfer for your specialized evaluation fee will be initiated the very second the banks open on Monday morning." We just need the official signed commitment papers tonight. We cannot wait through the weekend. He is becoming a severe danger to himself and to our young son." The notary shifted his weight nervously, aggressively wiping a line of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "And my fee?" he chimed in, his voice slightly nasal and trembling. "The documents are fully prepared. The power of attorney is completely drawn up with the necessary legal clauses for immediate total asset liquidation. But I need the cash in an untraceable envelope before I apply my official seal to these papers. Falsifying mental competency verification on a $5 million estate transfer is an enormous, massive risk." Valerie shot the notary a look of pure, venomous disgust. "Do not whine in my house," she snapped, dropping her sorrowful daughter routine instantly. "You will get your money precisely as we negotiated. You are getting paid $50,000 for 10 minutes of extremely easy work. Just prepare your stamp and keep your mouth shut until the doctor signs the medical evaluation." I lay there processing the sheer unfathomable evil unfolding in my own living room. They were negotiating the exact price of my total destruction right over my breathing body. They were casually splitting up my hard-earned fortune, paying off corrupt professionals to seal my fate and save Derek from the cartel assassins. I felt a tremendous, overwhelming urge to open my eyes, to leap up from the sofa, and to physically tear them apart. The anger was a living, breathing creature thrashing against my ribs, but I forced the creature down. I commanded my body to remain an empty, lifeless shell. I had to let them complete the crime. I had to let them definitively hang themselves on camera. Dr. Aris unclasped his leather bag. He pulled out a small metallic penlight. He leaned over me, prying my eyelid open. The searing light burned my retina. I kept my eye perfectly still, staring blankly without reacting. "Perfect," the doctor said. "He is completely unresponsive. Bring me the commitment papers." The heavy thud of the leather medical bag shifting on the glass coffee table was the only immediate response to her chilling declaration. I kept my breathing shallow, my chest barely rising, as the corrupt psychiatrist Dr. Aris began unpacking his tools of betrayal. The subtle metallic rasp of a heavy fountain pen being uncapped echoed loudly in my ears. I listened with a burning quiet intensity as a thick stack of crisp legal documents was unceremoniously dropped onto the table. The sharp rustle of the heavy paper sliding across the smooth glass sounded like the sharpening of a guillotine blade. They were standing mere inches from my motionless body, casually constructing the very cage that was meant to hold me for the rest of my days. "Let us proceed with the medical documentation first," Dr. Aris instructed, his voice maintaining that sickening, manufactured, professional calm. "I am currently dating and signing the Acute Cognitive Decline Certificate. This specific document outlines a rapid, irreversible onset of advanced dementia, accompanied by severe, violent psychotic episodes. It provides the absolute ironclad medical justification required to immediately remove him from this residence. I have explicitly recommended a mandatory 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold for his own personal safety and for the safety of your family." Derek let out a long, heavy breath, the sound vibrating with a profound relief. "And the facility?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly with nervous anticipation. "Are you absolutely certain they will hold him without asking too many questions?" Dr. Aris chuckled again, a dry, grating sound that made my skin crawl beneath the woolen blanket. "I have already contacted the intake coordinator at the St. Jude Psychiatric Facility on the east side of the city," he replied smoothly. "They have a highly secure, heavily medicated ward designed specifically for uncooperative, delusional elderly patients. I have a long-standing, highly profitable relationship with their primary administrators. When I present this signed certificate, they will accept him immediately. They will sedate him heavily upon arrival. He will not be in any condition to speak to an attorney, a judge, or any investigating authorities. He will be legally and medically invisible." The sheer methodical evil of their plan was staggering. They were not just stealing my hard-earned wealth. They were meticulously stripping away my basic human rights erasing my voice and burying me alive inside a heavily guarded chemical prison. I felt a tremendous, overwhelming surge of raw adrenaline flood my veins. The urge to rise from the leather sofa to shatter the glass table and to physically throw these monsters out of my home was a roaring fire in my mind. But the cold, calculating engineer within me forcefully suppressed the burning rage. I was the master architect watching the rats blindly navigate the final turn of a deadly maze. I needed them to complete the sequence. Every forged signature, every spoken intention was another heavy nail in their respective coffins. The microscopic cameras hidden throughout the living room were capturing every single damning syllable in pristine, high-definition audio. "I need you to sign this primary transfer documents right now, Valerie." The shady notary, Public, interjected, his nasal voice tight with aggressive impatience. "I am not waiting around here all night. The medical certificate is completely useless to me if the financial authorizations are not fully executed in my presence." I heard the distinct, sharp click of Valerie stepping closer to the coffee table. The rustle of expensive silk filled the quiet space as she leaned over the legal paperwork. "Give me the pen," she commanded, her tone entirely devoid of any hesitation or familial remorse. There was a brief pause followed by the heavy, deliberate scratching of a fountain pen, violently marking the paper. She was signing the fraudulent financial power of attorney. She was legally authorizing the theft of my legacy with the casual, detached stroke of a pen. "Make absolutely sure the transfer of the $5 million clears the escrow account by 9 exactly. Tomorrow morning," Derek, Valerie instructed, her voice dropping into a chilling, commanding register. "Do not delay. You take these notarized documents directly to the title company the very second their doors open. You authorize the release, you pay off those offshore monsters, and you completely erase that margin debt before the weekend begins. I will be waiting in the parking lot when they open." Derek promised, his voice slick with desperate greed. "Once the money is wired out of his commercial holding accounts, we are completely free. The cartel will have their capital, and we can finally breathe again." Valerie let out a short, dismissive scoff. She sounded completely victorious, utterly convinced of her own dark brilliance. "By the time he finally wakes up tomorrow afternoon, he will be strapped to a narrow bed in the locked ward at the St. Jude Psychiatric Facility," she said, the cruel satisfaction rolling off her tongue. "He will be heavily sedated, completely disoriented, and screaming about how his own daughter stole his money. And absolutely no one will believe a single word the crazy old man says. They will just increase his medication and lock the heavy door. We have won, Derek. We finally have everything." I lay perfectly still, committing the icy, sociopathic tone of her voice to my permanent memory. My own flesh and blood, the child I had raised and protected, was casually discussing my permanent chemical imprisonment, as if she were planning a simple weekend getaway. She had sold her soul for a luxurious lifestyle and a massive debt. The profound tragedy of her betrayal was entirely eclipsed by the absolute necessity of my impending retaliation. I was no longer a grieving father. I was a man fighting for his basic survival and the ultimate safety of his innocent grandson. "The transaction is almost complete," the notary said, his heavy breathing audible in the quiet room. "I have stamped the power of attorney and the commercial mortgage authorizations. However, there is one final crucial detail we must secure before I leave this house." "What is it?" Derek asked quickly, his nervous energy spiking once again. "We paid you to ensure this paperwork was flawless." "It is flawless," the notary replied defensively. "But the title company managing a transfer of $5 million will intensely scrutinize the primary deed transfer. A forged signature can sometimes be contested in a protracted civil court battle if the opposing lawyers are aggressive enough. We need something infinitely more permanent and biologically undeniable to accompany the ink. We need his physical thumbprint on the bottom of the commercial deed transfer document. It makes the transaction completely ironclad and legally unassailable." I felt a sudden sharp spike of genuine danger pierce through my carefully constructed calm. A thumbprint required direct physical contact. It required them to manipulate my body to press my flesh against an ink pad and transfer it to the paper. The sweating, visibly anxious fake notary slowly steps toward the edge of the large leather sofa where I am currently lying. "I just need his thumbprint on the deed transfer to make it ironclad," he says, reaching for my hand. The sweaty fingers of the fake notary wrapped tightly around my right wrist. He began to lift my hand from the soft leather cushion of the sofa, attempting to maneuver my heavy thumb toward the small rectangular black ink pad he held securely in his trembling left palm. His sour, anxious breath washed over my face in short bursts, mingling with the sharp, metallic tang of the black ink. He confidently expected the limp flesh of a heavily sedated victim, a hollow shell of a man who had completely surrendered his consciousness to a devastating chemical cocktail. He moved with the clumsy haste of a minor criminal, anxious to finish his dirty work and flee back into the comforting anonymity of the dark Seattle night. This was the exact fraction of a second where their entire carefully constructed illusion would violently shatter into a million jagged pieces. As his heavy thumb pressed firmly against the center of my palm, trying aggressively to pry my fingers open, I did not remain limp. With a sudden explosive surge of tightly coiled energy, my hand snapped completely shut. I clamped my rigid fingers down around his thick wrist with the crushing, unyielding force of a steel vise. The grip was absolute terrifying and fiercely punishing, fueled by hours of silent burning rage and a fierce paternal need to protect my innocent grandson from these monsters. The notary gasped, a sharp, wet, pathetic sound of pure, unadulterated shock echoing loudly in the quiet room. He desperately tried to yank his arm away, his panicked reaction to the sudden, agonizing pressure cutting off his circulation, but I held him firmly in place. My eyes finally snapped completely open. I completely and instantly discarded the vacant, cloudy stare of the broken old man they mistakenly thought they had conquered. My vision was incredibly sharp, completely lucid and blazing with a cold, righteous fury that seemed to drop the ambient temperature in the grand living room by 10 degrees. I watched with immense satisfaction as the blood rapidly drained from his sweaty face, leaving his skin a sickly pale, translucent gray. He opened his mouth wide to speak, to cry out for help, but his vocal cords were paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the situation unfolding before him. He was staring directly into the eyes of a supposedly brain-dead corpse that had suddenly decided to aggressively fight back. The corrupt private psychiatrist Dr. Aris was standing just a few inches behind the trembling notary, holding his metallic medical penlight suspended high in the air. When my eyes snapped aggressively open, the arrogant doctor physically recoiled backward, as if he had just been forcefully struck in the chest by a high-voltage electrical current. The penlight fell straight through the quiet air, hitting the thick glass surface of the designer coffee table with a sharp, resonant cracking sound, before rolling off the edge and landing softly on the expensive Persian rug. His arrogant, profoundly condescending facade vanished instantly, completely replaced by the undeniable terror of a man who had just realized his highly lucrative criminal career was permanently over. I finally released the fake notary's wrist, shoving his trembling hand away with a gesture of profound, undeniable physical disgust. He stumbled backward blindly, clutching his bruised arm against his chest, his breath coming in short, panicked wheezes. I firmly planted my feet onto the solid hardwood floor and sat up completely straight on the edge of the leather sofa. I successfully shed the fragile, stooped, pathetic posture I had successfully maintained for weeks on end. I was Victor, the brilliant engineer, the meticulous builder of massive commercial empires, the man who carefully designed unbreachable fortresses, and I had just brilliantly locked these arrogant criminals inside my most elaborate trap yet. Valerie had been standing confidently near the outer edge of the living room, her arms securely crossed over her chest, a smug, highly victorious smile resting on her painted lips. When I suddenly sat up and locked my sharp eyes onto her face, that confident smile shattered completely into 1,000 pieces. She let out a piercing, high-pitched, genuine scream of absolute, unadulterated terror. It was definitely not a scream of mild surprise, but rather a visceral bodily reaction to the sudden horrifying collapse of her entire fabricated reality. She stumbled violently backward, in a blind panic, her expensive silk dress twisting and tangling around her retreating legs. She completely lost her balance, her calves colliding heavily with the sharp, solid edge of the heavy wooden coffee table situated behind her. She tipped backward, her arms flailing wildly in the empty air, and crashed hard onto the polished floor, sending a stack of forged legal documents scattering high into the air like dead autumn leaves. Derek was currently frozen completely in place near the kitchen doorway, utterly unable to move. His face was a mask of pure cowardly panic. His jaw dropped open, and he stared wildly at me as if I were a vengeful spirit rising from the cold grave to exact my terrible revenge. He took a hesitant, trembling step backward, his wide eyes darting frantically toward the front door, desperately searching for an escape route that no longer existed. The deeply arrogant, incredibly greedy man who had confidently signed my name to a massive $5 million fraudulent commercial mortgage was now completely reduced to a trembling, whimpering, cowardly mess of a human being. The sudden silence in the expansive room was completely deafening, broken only by Valerie's harsh, panicked breathing as she scrambled backward pathetically on the expensive carpet, trying to put distance between herself and the father she had tried to bury alive. They were completely trapped in the blinding headlights of their own massive, catastrophic failure. I looked slowly at each of them in turn, deliberately letting the heavy, suffocating, crushing weight of my unblinking gaze firmly pin them to the floor like helpless insects. I deeply wanted them to feel the crushing, overwhelming magnitude of their impending legal and financial destruction. I truly wanted them to deeply understand that every spoken lie, every fake sympathetic tear, every poisoned drink had been meticulously recorded and legally preserved for the entire world to witness. You forgot one vital detail regarding my personal habits. Valerie, I said, my voice absolutely no longer weak, wavering, or trembling. It boomed strongly through the silent, expansive house, a deep, resonant baritone that commanded absolute, unquestionable authority. I slowly turned my head, locking my blazing, unforgiving eyes directly onto her completely terrified face as she cowered pathetically on the hard floor. I watched her swallow hard, her chest heaving with rapid animalistic panic. I never liked herbal tea, I stated flatly, letting the profound implication of those simple words echo loudly in the terrible stillness of the room. I reached my right hand smoothly into the front pocket of my tailored trousers. My fingers wrapped securely around the small textured plastic surface of the remote control I had kept safely hidden there all evening. I gave them absolutely no chance to speak, beg, or weave another pathetic layer of lies. I pressed the red panic button. The silent, agonizing wait was finally over. Less than 3 seconds after my thumb depressed the small textured surface of the panic button, the heavy, tranquil atmosphere of the Bellevue mansion shattered with a deafening, violent roar. The massive front doors did not just open. They were violently breached, kicked inward with such tremendous shattering force that the brass hinges shrieked in sudden protest, and the surrounding wood splintered into the grand foyer. A flood of harsh, blinding tactical flashlights instantly pierced the dim, moody lighting of my living room, cutting through the shadows like sharp, physical blades. I remained perfectly still, sitting straight and tall on the edge of the leather sofa, watching the coordinated chaos unfold exactly as I had meticulously planned alongside my legal team. Mitchell Reed strode through the shattered entryway, his polished leather shoes crunching heavily over the scattered splinters of oak. He looked like an avenging angel wrapped in a dark, bespoke suit. Flanking him with terrifying synchronized precision were 4 heavily armed agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically attached to the Financial Crimes Division, their tactical vests clearly bearing bold yellow letters. Behind them, a squad of local Seattle police officers flooded into the remaining spaces, fanning out rapidly to secure the entire perimeter. The imposing house was completely surrounded, locked down tight, with absolutely zero margin for error or escape. Federal agents. Nobody moved the lead. FBI agent bellowed, his voice carrying an immense echoing authority that vibrated in my chest. Keep your hands exactly where we can see them right now. The reaction in the room was instantaneous and profoundly chaotic. The shady notary public let out a high-pitched, strangled squeal of pure, unadulterated terror. He dropped his thick, worn leather briefcase, sending fraudulent documents scattering wildly across the expensive Persian rug, and threw his trembling hands high into the air, falling to his knees in an act of total, pathetic surrender. The corrupt private psychiatrist, Dr. Aris, stood completely frozen, his perfectly tailored silver suit suddenly looking incredibly foolish and out of place. He slowly raised his hands, his arrogant, superior demeanor completely evaporating, as he stared blankly at the tactical rifles pointed squarely at his chest. He knew his lucrative criminal career had just ended permanently. Derek, however, chose the absolute worst possible reaction. Driven by raw, cowardly panic and the overwhelming, suffocating realization that his massive $5 million cartel debt was now an inescapable impending death sentence, he bolted. He spun wildly away from the coffee table, his expensive dress shoes slipping slightly on the polished hardwood floor, and sprinted desperately toward the rear kitchen door leading to the dark patio. He did not make it past the marble kitchen island. A massive, broad-shouldered federal agent lunged forward with explosive, terrifying speed, tackling Derek directly around the waist. They hit the kitchen floor with a sickening, heavy thud. Derek groaned loudly, his face slamming forcefully against the cold, hard tiles as the agent efficiently pinned his arms tightly behind his back and secured his wrists with heavy steel handcuffs. Valerie was left standing completely alone in the center of the living room, her eyes darting frantically between her handcuffed husband, the surrendering corrupt medical professionals, and the heavily armed federal agents swarming her beautiful, meticulously decorated home. She looked directly at me, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. I simply watched her, my expression a mask of cold, unyielding granite. I waited patiently for her to realize that the brilliant, flawless trap had been masterminded by the very man she believed was losing his mind. I waited for the final desperate performance to begin, and she did not disappoint me. In a matter of mere seconds, the vicious, calculating predator vanished completely, entirely, replaced by a sobbing, terrified victim. Valerie fell heavily to her knees on the soft carpet, clasping her hands tightly together in front of her face. She forced a torrential flood of hot, desperate tears from her eyes, letting them streak her immaculate, expensive makeup. "Dad," she wailed, her voice cracking with a manufactured, heartbreaking agony. "Dad, please, you have to believe me. I did not want to do any of this. They forced me. Derek forced me to do this. He was in terrible, deep debt. He threatened me. He told me he would physically hurt little Leo if I did not cooperate with his insane, greedy plan. I was so scared, Dad. You have to save me. I was only trying to protect our family." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her lies was almost breathtaking. She was actively throwing the man she had conspired with straight to the hungry wolves, casually using her innocent, deeply traumatized son as a highly convenient shield to deflect the overwhelming weight of her own sociopathic guilt. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely no pity, no lingering warmth, and absolutely no paternal instinct. The woman kneeling on the floor, crying fake tears and begging for my protection, was a complete stranger to me. My real daughter had died a very long time ago, slowly consumed by an insatiable, toxic greed that had finally rotted her soul from the inside out. I stood up slowly from the leather sofa, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored trousers. I walked deliberately around the heavy wooden coffee table, stepping carefully over the scattered, fraudulent commitment papers and the dropped medical penlight. I stopped directly in front of Valerie. She reached out frantically, attempting to grasp my leg with her trembling hands, but I took a small, sharp step backward, completely rejecting her desperate physical contact. "Do not use the name of my grandson as an excuse for your vile, unforgivable cruelty." "Valerie," I said, my voice low, steady, and vibrating with an intense, deadly warning, "I heard every single word you spoke tonight. I watched you poison my tea. I watched you gleefully negotiate the exact price of my permanent incarceration. You were the eager, willing architect of this entire nightmare. You will face the absolute maximum legal consequences for your actions, and you will never, ever see my grandson again. Valerie let out a long, agonizing wail, collapsing forward onto the carpet as two federal agents stepped forward, hauling her roughly to her feet and securing her wrists in tight metal restraints. I turned away from her pathetic, sobbing form, completely dismissing her from my mind. My entire undivided focus shifted entirely to the bright kitchen, where Derek was now currently being hauled up from the cold tile floor. His expensive suit wrinkled and ruined his face, pale, bruised, and dripping with panicked sweat. I walked slowly toward Derek, savoring the absolute total destruction of his pathetic, fraudulent existence in my home. Mitchell Reed followed closely behind me, firmly carrying his heavy leather briefcase with grim, unwavering purpose. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from the trembling coward. Mitchell unlatched the brass locks and pulled out a thick, sealed legal envelope. He handed it directly to me without a single word. I took the heavy envelope, turning my blazing eyes toward Derek, preparing to deliver a final, devastating blow that he never saw coming. I stood over Derek, feeling the heavy textured paper of the envelope in my hands. He was trembling violently against the cold kitchen tiles, his eyes wide and pleading as he stared up at me. I did not offer him a single ounce of mercy. I tossed the thick legal envelope directly onto his chest. It landed with a dull, heavy thud against his ruined suit jacket. He flinched as if the paper itself had physically burned his skin. His breathing was shallow, his chest heaving rapidly as he tried to comprehend what was happening. "You truly thought you were clever, Derek," I began, my voice cold and echoing in the large space. "You thought you could simply forge a few signatures, pay off a corrupt doctor, and wire $5 million of my hard-earned money to save your own pathetic life. You genuinely believed you owed that massive, suffocating debt to a shadow syndicate, a group of violent men who would accept my liquidated estate in exchange for your miserable survival." Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He dared to glance down at the envelope resting on his chest, then back up at my face. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so that every syllable struck him like a physical blow. "2 weeks ago, the moment Mitchell discovered your illicit offshore accounts and your desperate, frantic margin calls, we initiated a highly complex financial maneuver. Mitchell and I quietly set up a blind shell corporation operating out of Delaware. We utilized layers of untraceable legal entities to approach your underground creditors. We bought your margin debt, Derek. We purchased every single cent of your $5 million liability." I watched the blood drain completely from his bruised face as the true horror of his situation finally dawned on him. The color vanished, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. "That is exactly what is inside that envelope," I continued, pointing a steady finger at his chest. "Those are the finalized, legally binding transfer documents. I am your creditor. You do not owe the cartel. You owe me. And I am officially foreclosing on everything you own. Every bank account, every vehicle, every single asset tied to your name is now legally frozen and forfeit. You are leaving this house with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back and a pair of federal handcuffs." Derek let out a pathetic, whimpering sob, burying his face against the cold floor. The absolute magnitude of his defeat had finally crushed him. I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sense of necessary justice. I turned my back on him, stepping out of the bright kitchen and back into the living room, where Valerie was still kneeling on the Persian rug. The federal agents had pulled her securely to her feet, her hands firmly restrained behind her back. Her expensive silk dress was torn, her makeup running in dark, messy streaks down her pale cheeks. She looked like a completely broken, fragile doll. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, calculating hope. She was still trying to find an angle, a way to manipulate my paternal instincts, a way to survive the devastating collapse of her master plan. "Dad, please," she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. "Please, I am your daughter. You cannot do this to me. We can fix this. I can go to counseling. I will do whatever you want." I stared at her for a long, quiet moment. The silence in the room was absolute heavy with the weight of 40 years of history. I remembered the little girl who used to hold my hand, the daughter I had protected, provided for, and loved unconditionally. But that girl was entirely gone. The woman standing before me was a stranger, a ruthless predator who had willingly plotted my permanent destruction. The daughter I loved died a very long time ago, I said, my voice incredibly calm, devoid of any anger or lingering sorrow. She died the exact moment you decided that your luxurious lifestyle was vastly more important than my life. She died the moment you tried to poison my mind with heavy chemical sedatives. She died the moment you terrorized my innocent grandson, using his safety as a bargaining chip for your own greedy survival. Valerie opened her mouth to speak, to offer another pathetic, transparent lie, but I raised my hand, silencing her completely. You are going to federal prison, Valerie, I stated firmly, ensuring every word resonated through the quiet room. You are not just facing charges for massive financial fraud and conspiracy. Because of the laced herbal tea you confidently served me tonight, the very tea you watched me supposedly drink, the federal prosecutor is actively pursuing charges for medical fraud and attempted manslaughter. You meticulously planned a lethal chemical assault. We have the video evidence, the audio recordings, and the unwashed ceramic mug waiting to be tested by the forensic laboratory. Your life as a wealthy, privileged socialite is completely over. She let out a piercing, agonized shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated despair that echoed off the high ceilings of the grand living room. It was not a cry of remorse, but the agonizing realization that she had finally lost everything. She thrashed against the strong grip of the federal agents, but they held her firmly in place, their expressions cold and entirely unsympathetic. An older, seasoned police officer stepped forward, pulling a small laminated card from his uniform pocket. Valerie Thurman. Derek Thurman, he began, his voice carrying the practiced rhythmic cadence of official law enforcement procedure. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, attempted grand larceny, medical fraud, and attempted manslaughter. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The officer continued reading the Miranda rights as the federal agents began moving the prisoners toward the shattered front entrance. They dragged Derek up from the kitchen floor, his legs barely supporting his weight. He stumbled blindly forward, his head hanging low in absolute shame. The corrupt private psychiatrist and the sweating notary public were marched out in grim silence, their lucrative careers permanently destroyed by their own insatiable greed. I followed them slowly toward the front door, stopping just inside the splintered oak frame. The cold, crisp night air swept into the foyer, carrying the sharp metallic scent of the heavy rain that had just begun to fall. The expansive manicured lawns of the upscale Bellevue neighborhood were illuminated by the harsh flashing red and blue lights of half a dozen police cruisers and unmarked federal vehicles. Despite the late hour, the sudden violent commotion had drawn the attention of the surrounding neighbors. I watched as doors cautiously opened and porch lights flickered on down the quiet, exclusive street. Wealthy, influential residents stood on their manicured lawns, clutching their thick robes against the damp chill, their eyes wide with shock and morbid curiosity. They watched in absolute silence as the perfect, enviable couple of the neighborhood was unceremoniously marched out of their grand mansion in heavy steel handcuffs. Valerie tried desperately to hide her face, turning her head away from the piercing glare of the police spotlights, but there was nowhere to hide. The facade of their immaculate, successful life was entirely shattered, their profound disgrace broadcast for the entire neighborhood to witness. The federal agents pushed them roughly into the back seats of the waiting cruisers. The heavy doors slammed shut with a final resonant finality. I stood in the doorway, watching the long line of vehicles slowly pull away from the curb, their flashing lights disappearing into the dark, rainy night. The intense, chaotic energy that had consumed the house for the past 2 hours finally began to dissipate, leaving behind a profound, heavy silence. Mitchell Reed stepped up beside me, placing a reassuring, solid hand on my shoulder. "We did it, Victor," he said softly, his voice thick with a deep, respectful relief. "The financial accounts are entirely secured. The transfer documents have been confiscated as hard evidence. The threat is completely neutralized. You are finally safe. I nodded slowly, feeling the immense crushing physical exhaustion finally begin to settle into my aging bones. "Thank you, Mitchell," I replied, my voice slightly raspy. "I could not have navigated this nightmare without your unwavering loyalty and your brilliant tactical mind." Mitchell squeezed my shoulder gently before turning back toward the living room to coordinate the final evidence collection with the remaining crime scene technicians. I stood alone in the quiet foyer for a moment longer, taking a deep, cleansing breath of the cool night air. The war was officially over. I had successfully dismantled the intricate, deadly trap my own flesh and blood had set for me. I had protected my legacy and secured my ultimate survival. But the long night was not entirely over yet. I turned away from the open front door, my gaze shifting toward the grand, sweeping staircase leading to the dark, silent second floor. The anger and the cold calculation slowly faded away entirely, replaced by a profound, warming sense of profound purpose. I had successfully destroyed the monsters, but I still had one final, critically important task to do tonight. I walked slowly toward the stairs, gripping the polished wooden handrail, and began the long ascent toward my innocent grandson's bedroom. I tossed the thick envelope onto his chest. It landed with a heavy thud. "You thought you owed $5 million to a shadow syndicate." "Derek," I said, my voice echoing coldly. "2 weeks ago, Mitchell and I set up a blind shell corporation. We bought your margin debt. I am your true creditor, and I am officially foreclosing on everything you own." He let out a broken sob, burying his face against the floor. I turned back to Valerie. "The daughter I loved died the moment she tried to poison my mind and terrorize my innocent grandson," I stated, offering no mercy. "You are going to federal prison for medical fraud and attempted manslaughter." The police read their rights and dragged them out in heavy handcuffs. I stood in the shattered doorway, watching our wealthy neighbors gather as the perfect couple was taken away in absolute disgrace. As the police cars finally pulled away into the dark night, I turned back inside. I had one final critically important task to do tonight. I climbed the heavily carpeted stairs, my hand sliding along the oak banister, each step feeling noticeably lighter. The oppressive weight that suffocated this household for months was finally gone. I gently pushed open the door to Leo's bedroom. The room was bathed in the rhythmic glow of emergency lights flashing through the blinds. Leo was sitting up in bed, clutching his stuffed bear tightly. His terrified eyes reflected the chaotic strobes outside. He looked so heartbreakingly vulnerable. I walked over and sat carefully on the edge of his mattress. He practically threw himself into my arms, burying his tear-stained face against my chest, his small frame trembling with silent sobs. I wrapped my arms around him securely, resting my chin on his head. I let him cry freely, entirely, absorbing his raw fear and replacing it with the solid safety of my embrace. "It is over, Leo," I whispered softly, my voice steady and reassuring. "Grandpa is fine, and no one will ever hurt you again." We sat together in the quiet darkness of his room, listening to the fading wail of the sirens. Holding the only true family I had left, I finally knew the horrific ordeal was entirely behind us. 6 months have passed since that terrible night. The transition was incredibly difficult, fraught with complicated legal battles and painful emotional revelations. But the brilliant legal framework Mitchell and I constructed held perfectly firm against every desperate challenge. I was officially granted full permanent legal custody of Leo. The stern judge looked at the irrefutable evidence of physical intimidation, financial ruin, and plotted medical harm and swiftly stripped Valerie and Derek of all parental rights. They are currently serving long, consecutive sentences in federal prison. They traded their freedom and their child for a pathetic illusion of wealth, and they will spend the next 2 decades paying the ultimate devastating price. Today, the expansive Bellevue mansion feels like an entirely different world. The heavy, dark energy has been thoroughly cleansed, replaced by the vibrant sounds of a young child allowed to be a child. I'm sitting on the dock of our lakefront property, the morning sun warming my shoulders. The water is perfectly calm, reflecting the endless blue sky. Leo is sitting right beside me, his small legs dangling casually over the edge, a fishing rod gripped tightly in his hands. He turns to look at me, a bright, genuine smile stretching across his face, completely free from the shadows of fear and manipulation. I smile back, feeling a profound, absolute peace settle deep within my soul. The toxic cancer has been entirely cut out of our family tree. The rot has been burned away, leaving behind only healthy soil and a true, unbreakable bond between a grandfather and his grandson. We are safe, we are together, and we are finally free. Blood does not guarantee true loyalty, and a polite, sweet smile can easily hide the most dangerous predator. When the people you sacrificed everything for begin to see you as an obstacle rather than a human being, you owe them absolutely no mercy. Always trust your deep intuition when things feel wrong. Never allow your age or your unconditional love for your family to make you a victim. True strength lies in the courage to cut out the toxic roots, protect the innocent who genuinely love you, and rebuild your life with complete dignity, no matter how old you are. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted with everything? How did you find the strength to fight back? Please share your story in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to catch our next incredible true story.